Hello, Lake Washington High School. It is your friendly chemistry and biology teacher here. We are working on our project of diversifying science at Lake Washington High School. I am joined today by Mr. Miller Adams and Dr. Preetha Ram. So we're going to be kicking off our interview today with Mr. Miller Adams, asking about Dr. Ram's kind of career, what got her interested in science, and what her pathway kind of looked like. And then we'll end off our interview today with all of your questions that you asked me. So Mr. Miller Adams, do you want to go ahead and take it off?
Thank you very much, Ms. Thody, and hello again, Lake Washington High School. This is the second time that you've seen me working with Ms. Thody on this project. It's really, really exciting. Today, you have yet again a wonderful guest. Dr. Preetha Ram has a tremendous story to tell about her career and where she is today. She'll probably share with you that she's in Silicon Valley, the hotbed of technology. She's working with a venture capital fund, which is very exciting. But I want her to start with way back in high school. Tell us, Dr. Ram, how things started for you in high school and college, and what led you to where you are today from that early age.
Thanks, Miller. Chemistry started for me, and I went to school in India in middle school in 7th grade. So in 7th grade, this teacher walks into the classroom, and like many of you, my chemistry journey starts with a good teacher story. So he walks into the classroom and he says, you folks are going to learn why salt is what it is and why sodium and chlorine come together to make salt and how, and you'll have answers to all the questions that you ever wondered. And I honestly, Miller, was hooked at that point. Sort of in my turbulent teenage years, the thought that there would be answers to many of the questions I had was just fascinating. And I haven't ever stopped being fascinated from then. As we went through 7th grade and 8th grade and then on to college, that was kind of when genetics emerged as a field, and the whole field of DNA, the fact that the chemistry of life was molecules that I had studied was just mind-blowing. So that's kind of 7th grade is when it all started for me, with this notion of sodium and chlorine. But what has always kept me attracted is the logic. And I will tell all of your students this: if they get their first few lessons of introductory chemistry, Gen Chem right, that logic will really serve you down, whether you're doing whether you're doing your PhD, as I ended up doing, or anything else. So Miller, I finished up. I graduated from college in India with a degree in chemistry. And quite honestly, I might as well confess this, Miller and Andrea, I was scared of math. And at that point, I had to figure out if I could still do chemistry, being scared of math. And it turned out that I managed. So I limped along for a bit, particularly when I came to Yale to do my PhD. And the first course I had to take was quantum chemistry, which some of you might know is, and thermodynamics, which is a whole lot of math. But I didn't let that stop me, because at that point, my PhD advisor said to me, we need to study how viruses can get into cells. And I want you to think back a good maybe 20, 30 years ago, when very little was known, and a lot of what we are using today and what's really relevant today was still being determined. And so I thought, oh, that's cool. That's really cool. How do viruses get into cells? And that's how we started. So I wasn't going to let something like quantum chemistry or math stop me along the way. And I just muddled through it. And I have to say this to anyone who's afraid of math right now: it is not possible. I am sure there are ways for you to get around this. Just persevere. It's just it's not like chemistry. It's just math.
Well, a question for you. You get your undergraduate degree from the India Institute of Technology. Is that right? Is that what it's called?
No, Miller. Before that, I was in a 3-year program where I did my bachelor's, and that was called Women's Christian College. And then I did my master's at the Indian Institute of Technology, that was an engineering school in Delhi.
So you finished at the Women's Christian College, and then you go to the India Institute of Technology. What was it like when you came home and said, Mom and Dad, I want to go to the United States to pursue my PhD? What was that like?
Well, Miller, that was an interesting question, and you all know that in India, particularly way back then, it was the common practice of having arranged marriages. So my mother, when I graduated from college, had it all lined up, and I obviously wanted to go on and study. So we had this bargain. If she could find a boy that sort of seemed the right fit, then I would get married. But if I got an admission letter from a good school, then I'd go do my PhD. So it was a close contest. It was a race. And the day I got my offer letter from the University of Pennsylvania, I said, "Here it is, UPenn. You can't go any better than that." So that's how they were very open-minded at that point, Miller. I have to give it to them.
So you go to the University of Pennsylvania and then you find your way to Yale and you get your PhD. And it looks like from the information you sent to me that you sort of started down a pathway around academia. Is that correct?
That's correct. So after I finished my PhD, as you know, everybody who's finished their PhD thinks about, okay, where do I go now? And I could go to industry or I could go to academics. And my PhD advisor, who was an amazing mentor, very, very considerate, very insightful, he said to me, "You know, Preetha, I think you should try your hand at teaching." And I said, "No, no, 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 I can't do that. You know, I don't know anything about teaching these American students, you know, what do I even know about them? I don't know the educational, I will do research." And I took off to Emory University to do research. But once again, I had an opportunity to teach. And once again, I went kicking and screaming. And Andrea, this was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was amazing. I loved it. I loved the students. I loved teaching them. And at that point, Miller, I decided to become a faculty, and I began teaching everything from general chemistry, analytical, and everything else. So that was the beginning of my academic career.
Well, that's interesting because I also know from the information that you sent to me that you started a company, you founded your own company and raised money the way people typically do in from the venture capital industry. But your company was tied to education. Explain that.
Absolutely. So you know how it is. It's the night before the test. And of course, nobody studies much before that. And it's 12 o'clock and you have questions and you wish someone could answer them, and particularly in Gen Chem. And of course, the answers are not in the textbook because you haven't even opened your textbook. So at that point, because I love teaching, my students in Gen Chem, a good class of about 100, 110, would email me. And I would be up at midnight answering these emails. And my husband said, "There's got to be a technology that can solve this problem. You know, what are you doing at 12 o'clock at night?" And I said, "Well, if there's a technology, maybe you know what it is." So with that challenge, we began creating this platform. And I call this a social platform because I was able to connect students with other students that could answer a question. And we got funded from the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health. We created a company and it did really well. And I decided that it was a moment, again, one of these life-changing moments when I thought, you know, Emory University is a nice place, a lovely place. I love it. However, there are so many students that will never be able to come to an Emory University and they need help. They need chemistry help and math help. So my vision for Open Study, which was the company, was a place where anyone could get help from anyone else for free and all within the matter of minutes. And it was a late night study help solution. So that's what happened.
That's great. That's great. And you took the company, you built the company, you later sold the company, and now you've moved into the venture capital area. Now I'm looking at my clock here, and I need to allow Andrea to start asking you some of the questions that the students are sending to you. So let's go to the questions from the students.
So a lot of my students, because of your impressive resume, are honestly just kind of curious what a typical day in your life looks like. You've done so many different things and they're kind of curious, like, what do you do even pre-COVID? What does a typical day in your life look like?
Let me give you three snapshots. Life now is very different to what it used to be. But I bet I'm hoping some of your students are wondering, what is it like to do a PhD, to be in science? It was the most fun time in my life. Whoever says it's not fun should just go back and think again. think about this. You're in an environment where there's a lot of other young people. And your friends together, you hang out late at night. We would work in our labs. We would hang out in our labs till like midnight, working on some project or the other. We would walk home together, to our apartments, because you don't want to walk home alone, of course. And the only thing you have to do is to pursue some fascinating topic in depth, like, oh, how do viruses get into the cell, just for example. And the fascinating thing about that is that every little bit that a researcher contributes together goes towards a larger mosaic. So even though yours is a little piece, now in 20 years, we have so much information that Moderna can make a vaccine. So life as a PhD, I recommend it. Life as an entrepreneur, I was running my company. We were in Silicon Valley. My team was all over the place. So every morning I would get up, look at what was happening on the site, talk to one of those millions of students out there. I loved them. They loved me. We would talk about stuff. They would tell me what to do, and also manage the technology, manage the legal issues, manage the finances of the company, get funding, all in a day's work. And I just absolutely love doing that. I recommend that to anyone who wants to try it. You are, as the founder, I was my own boss, and I made decisions, good or bad, and I had a blast doing it. Right now, it is even more exciting, even though it's COVID, we're sitting all in our Zoom sessions. What I do right now, I do a couple of different things. As I am general partner in this venture firm, Pier Ventures, we look, a VC creates the future. The way he creates the future is by investing in certain technologies over others, certain companies over others. And so we invest in technologies that make it safe and smart and that are sustainable to fly, to go from place to place. We're creating the future of mobility. So I know you're interested in this topic, so I brought this up. We invest, for example, in electric fuels. We invest in hydrogen fuels. As you know, they are very environmentally friendly. We look for electric engines that don't use fossil fuels. That's going to have a huge environmental impact. So by picking and choosing and selecting these kinds of companies, I think and I'm proud to be a part of the effort to really redefine what our future is going to look like. So that's, in a nutshell, 3 different snapshots.
Yeah, I have a question too, following up. So you were talking about the sustainable future and kind of picking and choosing what you're choosing to invest in and kind of endorse. And you're kind of mentioning this concept of a greener tomorrow. And I'm curious as to, if you were to paint a picture of a greener tomorrow, what does that mean to you? What are you foreseeing to be this greener tomorrow? You mentioned kind of electric and flying cars. And so what does a greener tomorrow mean and look like to you?
So I just speak with the narrower lens of the greener tomorrow with mobility, because I've really delved and drilled deep into this. So I think the mobility of tomorrow is not just going to be a 2-dimensional transportation grid. It's definitely have to include 3-dimensional. And yes, it might include things that we are now calling flying cars, but for sure, we can think of it with 4 letters. We call it ACEs, where things are going to be autonomous. Things are going to be connected, your car, your flying object connected to some ground hub. Then it's going to be electric. For sure, it's more environmentally friendly. We might see hydrogen fuels down the line. We certainly hope so. They'll burn cleanly. And also the S, I would say, stands for smart or sustainable or both. And definitely sustainability and green is going to be a focus of this. Less noise, less pollution, more connected, short hops. You should be able to get out of your house. I don't know how far you are from the city, but let's say you're an hour away. You should be able to have your air taxi arrive at your door, electric, perhaps autonomous, take you to the city where your, again, autonomous vehicle, electric, will take you to somewhere. So that's where we're going.
I love picturing this kinds of things about like my flying car coming to pick me up, but I don't know how far into the future, but I also want to think about the now. Things that my high schoolers and my students could be changing in their lives now. What are things that you could maybe recommend to my students to maybe help contribute to this greener tomorrow and a greener future?
I think your high school students are extremely important in creating this future in many different ways. For a start, it's the commitment that they're making to themselves that fossil fuels need to go. It's that kind of commitment that starts mentally with teachers like you showing them the way. Second, I would like to see some, if not many of your students think about embracing science. As I said, we can't create the future without science and technology. It has to start with individuals who are scientists and researchers who are working in companies that add to our body of knowledge. Okay, so that's another commitment that they have to make. And I think the third commitment towards creating this future is the ability to have an open mind to embrace it. And I think your students at their age group, where they are, will be the front runners. People like us will just look at it and say, whoa, but these people, the people in your classes, the ones who are looking and listening, I hope will be the forerunners and lead the charge into the future, as it were.
I think that's beautiful. And one of the last questions that I actually have for you kind of stems off of that, about you and I think Mr. Miller, Adams, and I all wanting to really encourage my students to go into science. And so I'm asking, what kind of advice you would offer to maybe my students, specifically my students who are young women and people of color who are seeking and going to a science career?
Wow. I think, firstly, what's important to know that science can be a lot of fun. It is social. You create it with people. You get to know a lot of interesting and smart people. So don't get put off by whatever notion you have that it's an isolated single person working in the lab together, working in the lab alone kind of a thing. So that's number one. Number two, science is very, very important for this future. Now, you may not end up being the person that gets the Nobel Prize for chemistry. I mean, a lot of people don't. But remember that even having an undergraduate education in science can help in many ways. So start there. I think every individual needs to have a backing of science, because the future, honestly, Andrea, is going to be a lot about science and technology. So that's number two. And number three, I want to encourage women, particularly, to not think of this as a field which restricts or shuts people out or offers barriers. There are so many women that have pursued this despite all of the issues that we've had to deal with. You have to deal with issues everywhere. So the advice I give everyone, women or others, is to look for a mentor. All through my career, and I was telling Miller this the other day, I've been really fortunate in having a mentor, male, female, black, brown, white, it doesn't matter. A person who takes an interest in you and kind of guides you around the obstacles. So I think the most important thing is have a mentor. They'll encourage you when things aren't going well. They'll open doors for you, and they'll keep you going.
It's amazing. I love this concept of, not only have we heard this before, but this concept of choosing a mentor, somebody who can really help you and recognize your pathways, but also helping you be vulnerable and recognize like, oh, like maybe this isn't for me, or, oh, we're really good at this. And I love that concept, especially because it's kind of echoing what you do now as a teacher. And Nadine and all of the education background that you have. But I wanted to thank you so much for your time. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. So thank you, Dr. Preetha Ram, so much for taking time out of your day to help diversify science at Lake Washington High School and talk about your career and pathway. And also thank you, Mr. Miller Adams.
Thank you very much, Andrea.